Inajiro Asanuma was a Japanese politician and leader of the Japanese Socialist Party. Asanuma was a polarizing figure in the world of Japanese politics. He retired from politics in 1942 after having voiced his displeasure with the direction of World War II and wouldn't return until after Japan's surrender in 1945. By that point, having become an outspoken socialist and left-wing activist, he caused massive controversy in 1959 after visiting communist China and declaring in a speech in Beijing that the United States was the shared enemy of Japan and China, and even returned to Japan wearing a Mao uniform, openly expressing his support for Mao Zedong's communist regime. After this, Asanuma began leading protests against the US-Japan Security Treaty, leading marches on the Japanese Diet itself. This greatly angered the far-right group, the Great Japan Patriotic Party, and its leader, Bin Akeo. Akeo believed that Asanuma was going to lead a communist revolution against the Japanese government. The Great Japan Patriotic Party was strongly pro-United States and were in favor of Japan's alliance with them. The group would launch counter-protests during Asanuma's marches, which would often lead to many arrests on both sides. One activist, who had been arrested a total of 10 times at these events, was 17-year-old Otoya Yamaguchi. The son of a high-ranking officer in the Japan Self-Defense Force, he joined the Great Japan Patriotic Party when he was only 16 after being radicalized by his older brother. As time went on, and the protests from both sides continued, Yamaguchi eventually became disillusioned with Akeo's leadership, believing that the latter was not, quote, radical enough. On May 29, 1960, Yamaguchi left the group in order to take divisive action on his own. On October 16, 1960, Inajiro Asanuma was participating in a televised election debate at Hibiya Public Hall in central Tokyo, which also featured the leaders of other major parties, including the then Prime Minister, Hayato Ikeda. The debate took place before an audience of 2,500 people and was also broadcasted nationwide. As soon as Inajiro began his speech, he was heckled by far-right audience members and had to stop speaking while the moderator of the event asked for calm. Five minutes later, Asanuma began his speech again. What you're seeing here is essentially Asanuma's final moments of life. As you can see, he turned to look to his left. What he saw was Otoya Yamaguchi running towards him with a 13-inch samurai sword that he had stolen from his father. Less than a fraction of a second after this shot, Yamaguchi stabbed him right between his ribs. He then attempted to turn the blade on himself, but was wrestled to the ground by bystanders and event staff. Asanuma was immediately rushed to a nearby hospital. However, the blade had cut his aorta, which led to him dying minutes later from internal bleeding. Following the assassination, Otoya Yamaguchi was arrested and imprisoned awaiting trial. Throughout his imprisonment, he remained calm and composed, and freely gave extensive testimonies to police. Yamaguchi insisted that he had acted alone and without any direction from others. On November 2nd, he wrote on the wall of his cell using toothpaste, "Long live the Emperor." This photo was taken immediately after Yamaguchi stabbed Asanuma by Yasushi Nagao. It won the 1960 World Press Photo of the Year, and a year later, Nagao was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for the photo. Yamaguchi immediately became a hero and martyr to the Japanese right-wing activists. On December 15, 1960, a large number of right-wing groups gathered in the very same Hibiya Public Hall where the assassination took place to hold a national memorial service for Yamaguchi. 60 years later, Yamaguchi is still revered by these groups, and they are still holding memorial services every year on November 2nd, the anniversary of his suicide. Christine Chubbuck was an American reporter who worked at WXL-TV as an evening news reporter, later moving on to host the morning community Affairs talk show titled Suncoast Digest. Chubbuck, who was known to detest what she referred to as blood and guts reporting, i.e. sensationalized violence over legitimate journalism, had volunteered to produce a feature on suicide for the station, during research for which she had asked a police officer how someone would go about taking their own life. On July 15, 1974, Christine read an 8-minute newsreel made up of 3 stories. On the 4th story, which was about a shooting at a local restaurant, The Real Jam. At this point, Christine simply turned to the camera and said, "In keeping with Channel 40's policy of bringing you the latest in blood and guts and in living colour, you are going to see another first." Attempted. Chubbuck then drew a revolver that she had hidden in her bag and turned it on herself as the technical director scrambled to fade rapidly to black. After being rushed to Sarasota Memorial Hospital, it was discovered by WXL-TV news director Mike Simmons that Chubbuck had left behind both a follow-up news story describing her suicide attempt and a note in which she said goodbye to her co-workers and loved ones, also expressing the chilling sentiment that she wanted everybody to see the broadcast. The footage of Christine's suicide was never shown to the public. The 2 copies of the master tape that were known to exist were given to her family, who destroyed them. According to an article by Vulture on June 8, 2016, the video does still exist in the hands of Molly Nelson, the widow of the former owner of WXL-TV. Her husband, for reasons he never shared, kept a copy of the tape, and when he died, it passed to her. However, when this was publicized, she started getting requests to see it, which made her uncomfortable. She says that the tape is of a very large law firm for safekeeping, and that she has no intention to ever let anyone else see it. She also stated that she only held onto the tape to honor her husband. As such, it's highly unlikely this footage will ever be seen by the public. On April 15, 1989, Liverpool football club faced Nottingham Forest in an FA Cup semi-final match at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. The stadium had had several incidents before involving challenges due to overcrowding in the standard terraces, where hundreds more fans were allowed into the areas that were sat in an area with a capacity of over 29,000 and over 60 turnstiles for people to enter. The Liverpool fans were placed in the north end of the stadium, which had a capacity of 24,000 with only 23 turnstiles. At 2:20 p.m., 40 minutes before kickoff, 350 people arrived on several buses. Because these people arrived so close to the start of the game, this caused congestion of the turnstiles. Before the start of the game, the BBC commentator pointed out that there was already far too many people in the standing area. The police requested a 10-minute delay to the match to give them time to get the fans into the stadium in a more orderly manner. However, this request was denied. At this point, there were around 5,000 people outside the stadium waiting to get in. To reduce the number of people outside, several exits were opened to allow fans to begin flooding into the standing pens. The people at the front of the pens were suddenly pushed into the fence from behind as more and more people began pushing their way into the stadium. Before long, people standing next to the fences were being squashed against them from behind, to the point where some of them couldn't move at all. In an attempt to try and reduce the crush, some fans managed to climb over the fence and did their best to lift as many people out of the pens as they could. People from the stands above the pens were also lifting fans to safety. The police thought that the people climbing over the fence were trying to invade the pitch and began stopping people from climbing over. Eventually, the fence in pen 3 collapsed, and the fans in the front fell as the people behind them were unable to stop themselves from tripping over them due to the sheer force of the crush pushing into the fence. With a number of fans now free, they began breaking down parts of the fence to help those trapped in the crush to escape. By this point, many fans had already died from asphyxiation or from trampoline. The police were actively stopping the fans from getting medical help for the injured, as they wouldn't allow any of the ambulances outside the stadium. 96 people died in the crush, and 766 were injured. Police and stadium officials maintained their innocence for many years after the event, saying that the crush was the result of hooligans storming into the stadium without...
If they're asking them to do, they wouldn't get...
2016, families of the 96 people who died took the South Yorkshire Police Court, where the jury concluded that the people were killed due to police negligence. Many of the deceased were children and teenagers, with the youngest being only 10 years old. Unlike the Bradford City fire, where the police did everything they could to save the fans from danger, and even worked together to do so, the police at the Hillsborough disaster did everything they could to stop the fans from getting to safety. And because of this, 96 people died in what is the darkest day in British football history. On October 30th, 2015, Romanian metalcore band Goodbye to Gravity was celebrating the release of their new album with a free concert at Club Collective in Bucharest, Romania. This being a special occasion, the band had prepared a pyrotechnic and light show to accompany them during the concert. About an hour and a half into the show, the pyrotechnics were set up as they sparks ignited pillars of technical scaffold and caught fire. Due to the pillars supporting the roof being covered by flammable acoustic foam, the fire spread very quickly to the ceiling and caused it to collapse. Upon noticing the fire, the audience, which comprised of 200 to 400 people, began trying to flee the building to get to safety. However, there was only one working exit, and the stampede quickly began as concertgoers rushed to the only half-open exit, climbing over each other to get to safety. The concertgoers reportedly had to break down the other half of the exit to escape. The emergency services arrived 11 minutes after being called, and the code red state of emergency was declared, after witnessing the nightmarish sight of concertgoers with full body burns screaming in agony. Over 500 emergency workers were called in, including firefighters, police, and medical crews. 27 people were pronounced dead at the scene, including Goodbye to Gravity guitarist Vlad Telia and Mihai Alexandru. The band's drummer, Bogdan Ina, died from his injuries on November 11, being transported to a hospital in Switzerland. Bassist Alex Pascu died on November 11 after being transferred to a hospital in Paris, France. In total, 64 people died after it was determined that the fire safety precautions had been ignored on the night of the concert. 3 of the club's owners were charged with negligent homicide and bodily harm. Following the fire, 3 days of national mourning was declared. In the week after the fire, protests erupted throughout Romania, with people calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Victor Ponta and Minister Gabriel Oprea, accusing them of corruption for allowing the club to go ahead with the concert despite the owners obviously ignoring the safety regulations. Was the only member of Goodbye to Gravity to survive the fire, suffering burns to 45% of his body. This incident is very similar to the station nightclub fire which I covered in the first horrifying incidents video. Both could have been avoided if the bands at both concerts hadn't insisted on using pyrotechnics on small indoor stages. If they'd opted to perform the show without, people wouldn't have had to die so needlessly. Daniel Pellegrin, better known by his stage name, MC Deleste, was a Brazilian rapper operating out of Sao Paulo. Beginning his career in 2009, he quickly gained a substantial following, and by the time he was 20, he was reportedly earning upwards of $85,000 a month. Deleste would often write songs about his very difficult and tumultuous life growing up in the slums of Sao Paulo.